Hello, folks. This is Rhett Wilson. It is Thursday, September the 3rd, and I hope you are well. Thomas Sowell, who is a Black American economist and the senior fellow of the Hoover Institute, said this: deception is one of the quickest ways to gain little things and lose big things. And in the United States of America today, right now, we are in danger partly because of deception. We are in danger of losing some very big and important things. You know what the greatest threat to freedom is and the future of America is right now? The greatest threat to liberty and to America is the left. Now, when I say the left, I'm not talking about classic liberalism or classic liberals, and I'm certainly not talking about classic conservatives. When I talk about the left, I'm talking about leftists and their leftism ideology. In the 20th century, leftism gave us devastated societies like fascist Italy and Nazi Germany and the takeover of Russia by the communists. Uh, the United States fought two world wars and one Cold War over these ideologies. And these were so influenced by Karl Marx and by like minded thinkers. President Ronald Reagan once said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And what we've seen the last several decades, kind of quietly in America, there have been a lot of leftists in some of our universities, and they've trained a couple of generations of people to think like leftists. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, has a great article called Three Generations of Brainwashing Are Paying Off for the Left. I encourage you to go and check it out. David Lane says this: there are very real consequences to having allowed secularists, those in rebellion against God, to imbue the minds of America's youth with their profane propaganda. And this is exactly what has happened. And so we've got a number of people in America now that don't love America, and they don't love freedom, and they don't love religion, because leftism does not love religion. Leftism does not love freedom of speech. And so they're going to come against those things. A great example of this was just a few years ago when one man was before a subcommittee in the Senate, and he was being interviewed for a treasury position in the government. And when it came Bernie Sanders' time to interview him, now Bernie Sanders is not a liberal. Bernie Sanders is a leftist. He is a communist at heart. He is a great example of how the Democratic Party today is caving to leftists, not liberals, but leftism. And they are letting leftists take over their party now. And Bernie Sanders, when it was his time to interview him, he asked him this question. He said, do you believe that Muslims go to heaven? Now, this man that was interviewing for the job, he was a Christian. He was a graduate of Wheaton University, which is a well-known conservative evangelical university. And this man looked a little taken aback by that question, because what in the world does his theology have to do with serving in a treasurer's role in the U.S. government? It has nothing to do with it. But Bernie Sanders asked him, and he gave a great answer. He said, sir, I'm a Christian. And he said, I have historic Christian theology, and historic Christian theology teaches that a person needs to know Jesus Christ in order to be saved. And Mr. Sanders pressed him a little bit about that, and the man basically gave the same answer. And Bernie Sanders said this. He said, Mr. Chairman, I submit basically that this kind of person that thinks this way has no place serving in the U.S. government. You can go and you can YouTube and pull up the video. Now, here is classic leftism. Classic leftism does not like religion, because classic leftism has its own religion. That they have their own value system, and they want everyone to submit to their value system. They want everyone to submit to what they say. And so here he is saying, if a Christian who believes in traditional Christian theology applies for a post in the U.S. government, he should not be allowed to have a place. That is leftism, folks, and that is what we're fighting here. Leftism thrives off of deception. Leftism thrives off of smoke and mirrors. The leftism thrives off of saying this thing while I'm actually doing this thing. And that is something that happened again and again in Nazi Germany, in fascist Italy, and in the former Soviet Union. There are 7 lies that Americans are believing and that the left is pushing. And I think we need to be aware of these 7 lies. Several weeks ago, I wrote an article on my blog. My blog is called Faith, Family, and Freedom. You can find it at www.wilsonrhett.com. That's my name, last name first, www.wilsonrhett.com. The article is called 7 Lies Americans Are Believing. It's actually called They Are Playing Us, 7 Lies Americans Are Believing. And it's been viewed more than 40,000 times, and I encourage you to read it, pass it along, share it with someone else. 7 lies. Let me tell them to you quickly. Number 1, the Black Lives Matter narrative is the first lie that Americans are believing. Albert Mohler, president of the Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, he said, while we certainly should affirm the statement that Black lives matter, just as all lives matter, we cannot embrace the movement of Black Lives Matter. The BLM organizers have admitted they are trained Marxists. They are trained organizers. Folks, this is right out of the Karl Marx or the Saul Alinsky playbook. Their goal is not primarily to help Black Americans or to help Blacks and people of other colors get along. Their goal is to tear down American democracy. That is why they have to go after our symbols, our statues, and our memorials to the past. What they do is they jump into this emotional appeal of saying, well, Black Lives Matter. Well, of course, Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. But they try to appeal to good people in that emotional sense, but then they hijack that and they use it for other means. This is why several months ago, when all of the tearing down of statues was going on, and they were saying we need to get rid of Gone with the Wind and the Dukes of Hazzard and Aunt Jemima and all of these inconsequential things. This is why some of them were calling for the removal of Mary Poppins. Why? Well, because in Mary Poppins there are chimney sweeps, and the chimney sweeps have soot on their face, and surely that is a racial image that Disney was promoting. Now, that is just idiocy right there, okay? There's a Hebrew word for that, and the word is stupid, okay? But see, they're trying to jump on this emotional bandwagon. It's also why these riots, this looting, has been extremely organized, well planned, and deeply funded. And folks, this is what happened in Nazi Germany. This is what happened when the communists took over Russia. They erased the past and they stamped out the church as much as possible. Now, in all of that movement, they've made it clear they will not stop until they tear down America. And one of their founders has even said, if we don't get our way, we will burn down the entire system. That's the first lie. Second lie is, and by the way, let me encourage you to read Ryan Baumberger's article. Ryan Baumberger is a Black American. He wrote a great article called Top 10 Reasons I Won't Support the Black Lives Matter movement. Second lie America is believing is the be afraid of the left and keep quiet narrative. The Nazi Party knew in the 1930s that it was necessary for them to get the church under their thumb if they were going to take over the German people. And so they worked to begin intimidating the church and intimidating the pastors so that the pastors would not speak out against them from the pulpit. They didn't want their pastors to be like the pastors at the American Revolution were, because the pastors in New England at the American Revolution, they were training their congregations and they were thundering from the pulpits that the people should resist the king and should resist England. Folks, this narrative is in full swing in our country today. Did you hear of Principal Tiffany Wiley of Windsor, Vermont, who was fired recently by the school board because she tweeted out a concern about the tactics of Black Lives Matter? Just last week, I had someone contact me on Facebook, and he said, Rhett, he said, thank you for what you write. Thank you for what you put online and on social media. He said, I agree with you, but he said, I'm afraid to post anything, and I'm afraid to say anything like that because I could get fired. And he said, there are a couple of women where I work that have been fired because they put on social media that they disagreed with the tactics of how the Black Lives Matter movement is going. Folks, this is the be afraid of the left and keep quiet narrative. If you disagree with us, you be quiet or we're going to come after you. See, this is the left. The left hates free speech because they want everybody to agree with what they say and with their speech. They don't want anyone to challenge their cultural narrative. Well, folks, do you remember the old story of the frog in the kettle? The frog in the kettle stays in that kettle and it slowly warms up and it slowly warms up and it slowly warms up until the frog is dead and he can't jump out of that hot water. So that's the second lie that Americans are believing, that we should be afraid of the left and keep quiet. Number three, the third lie Americans are believing is that law enforcement is systematically racist against Black people. This is a huge one. Heather McDonald of the Manhattan Institute has done extensive research on law enforcement and racial bias. Her findings overwhelmingly show that the idea of widespread racial bias by police is a myth that simply does not exist. She had an article this summer in the Wall Street Journal called The Myth of Systemic Police Racism. She wrote, a solid body of evidence finds no structural bias in the criminal justice system with regard to arrests, prosecution, or sentencing. Crime and suspect behavior, not race, determine most police actions. If you go to my blog, I just posted a video by Heather McDonald when she talks about this. Dr. Walter Williams, a Black professor of economics, says this: while it might not be popular to say in the wake of the recent social disorder, the true plight of Black people has little or nothing to do with the police or what might be called systemic racism. He says that in his article, The True Plight of Black Americans. That is Dr. Walter Williams. Also on my blog, I have a post called Black Homicides and Other Statistics. I encourage you to look at that and actually look at some of the numbers and the statistics about these things. One thing the left does so well, though, is they play off of emotional reactions, not systematic facts and logic. Number four, the fourth lie Americans are believing is it's okay for them to loot and steal because peaceful protests have not worked narrative. I have heard this in abundance, and I've heard it ad nauseum. Dennis Prager writes, America is being taken over by violent mobs. A vast amount of destruction and stealing has taken place. Why aren't all clergy delivering thundering sermons about the seventh commandment, thou shalt not steal? A central part of a major American city has been seized and occupied by people who hate America and its values, including its Judeo-Christian values. It was just in the news yesterday that much of downtown Portland is in financial ruin and will not recover because of all of the protests, the riots, the looting that have gone on. You know, when our children were preschoolers and young elementary students, and they would get mad and hit something, or they might get mad and hit each other, I would tell them, I would say, you know what? You've got until you're 17 or 18 to learn self-control. Because if you do that when you're 18, they will take you to jail. Now, I wasn't being a mean daddy. You know what I was doing? I was giving them some reality and some reality discipline. African American Thomas Sowell, he says, have we reached the ultimate stage of absurdity where some people are held responsible for things that happened before they were born, while other people are not held responsible for what they themselves are doing today? Let me spell that out. In other words, I'm not responsible for slavery that happened 150 and 200 years ago. I'm not responsible for that at all. However, people, whether they're white, black, Hispanic, whatever they are, people that are looting and burning down businesses and murdering people in cold blood, they must be held responsible for what they are doing today. Civilization does not work when violence becomes acceptable. We heard of one woman that responded to the looting, and she was asked, why do you think this is okay? And her response was, well, these businesses that have insurance, that's why it's okay. That's another Hebrew word for that one right there. Congressman Jeff Duncan shared this. We are no longer dealing with legal, peaceful protests. This is organized criminal activity that is taking over our cities. And folks, you know, one of the most amazing things about it to me, at the Democratic National Convention 2 weeks ago, there was zero mention of this. Zero. This is one of the most critical issues facing America today. And you know what they did? They caved to the left. They caved to leftism and to the things that I'm talking about right now. I was pleased to see last week at the Republican National Convention how much they talked about this and how much they talked about the need to restore law and order. The fifth lie Americans are believing is the don't offend anyone narrative. See, academic leftists pushed the idea that truth is relative for several generations. And when enough people bought into that, then a new standard arose, if you can use standard in that context. And the new standard was this: don't offend anybody. When I was a senior in college, I can remember one of my professors telling us this, that the way that you make moral decisions is to decide what will offend the least amount of people. See, that is a world without absolutes. Well, after that, there has risen a new generation, and we call them the snowflake generation. And we're paying the price for it because it is this generation that gets terribly, easily offended at so many things. When we jettison the idea of objective, factual truth, you know what we create? We don't create a nice, sweet society where everybody sings "It's a Small World" anymore. No, that's not what happens. What happens is we create a society where might becomes right, and whoever uses enough force wins. That is classic leftism. That's what they did in Nazi Germany. That's what they did in fascist Italy. That's what they did in communist Russia. Might became right, and whoever could scare them enough and wield enough power, they were the ones that became right. Let me tell you what the left means. They have worked for generations to say, don't offend anybody. But what they mean is don't offend them. That's what they mean. They don't care if they offend you or your belief system. They just don't want your belief system to offend what they believe. They have said, if you'll just accept everything, then we'll all get along fine. But that's not what they mean, and we're seeing it now. What they mean is once we push our social agenda on you, then if you don't agree with it and teach your children to agree with it, then we're going to punish you. Then we're going to come after you. Then we're going to take away your freedoms. Folks, liberty is at stake. Don't be deceived. The left thrives off of getting society to believe lies. Dennis Prager has an excellent article on his website, and I have it on my blog, called Fear of the Left, the Most Powerful Force in America Today. Also, check out Ben Carson's article, We Need to Stop Getting Offended. Two more lies Americans are believing. Number 6, the way to a better future is to erase the past. Again, classic Marxism. When the communists took over Russia, they tore down the churches. They pulled steeples down. They took crosses down. They confiscated Bibles. Trained Marxists ride on the wave of being offended, and then they systematically remove anything from society that doesn't fit their agenda. Today, we're seeing this in just ridiculous measures in America, where people are being told that all kind of ridiculous things are offensive now. But it's not going to stop there, because you know what? Now some of the Black Lives Matter people, you know what they're calling for? That we need to remove any statues or stained glass windows depicting white Jesuses or white Bible characters. Folks, this will not end until they have either been subdued or they have dominated. George Orwell prophetically wrote, every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered. Governor Mike Huckabee said it's an all-out assault on all American history and culture, and everything and everyone who did something to contribute to it. And folks, let me tell you something, a little bit of logic here. Do you know that the only perfect human being that has ever lived is Jesus Christ? And so any person to whom or for whom you erect a statue, when you make a statue about any person, there are going to be faults in that person's life. There are going to be faults in that person's past. You don't erect a statue because you think that person is perfect. You put up a statue or a memorial to remember the good things about that person. And be very careful of the idea that you can't find good in these people that they're trying to tear down. Again, African American Walter Williams, he has a great article called Rewriting American History. Finally, the last lie that Americans are believing, number 7, is the lie that we need to focus on color narrative. Folks, let me tell you the truth. In America, most white people don't hate black people, and most black people don't hate white people. And you'll notice I don't use the terms African American and European American much. I use the term white and black because we are Americans together. In the America that I live in, most blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians, and people of all kinds of nationalities and colors get along well. They look out for each other, they work together, and they help each other with a kind spirit. However, the media constantly pushes the focus on color narrative, and the left tries to convince us that at our heart we are a racist, flawed nation. Dennis Prager, again, an American Jew, for years has challenged this narrative. He says, I'm increasingly impatient with the libel that America is racist. Yes, there are racists in America of all colors, but knowledge of history should restrain one from making unfair generalizations. America is the least racist, multiracial society in the world. On a daily basis, Americans of every race and ethnicity get along superbly. Black woman Candace Owens had a recent broadcast where she discusses Black Lives Matter and Black America. And the episode is called, What Does Black America Want? Folks, the Bible teaches that there's one race, and that's the human race. And we are all created in God's image. That's why we should love each other. That's why we should treat each other with respect and dignity, regardless of somebody's color or regardless of someone's history. Folks, there is a huge cultural shift going on now. And some people want to say that the root of all this is racism and we need to focus on color. Folks, it's like having an 18-wheeler with 18 wheels flat. And if you have 18 wheels flat, you don't just need to fix one tire in order to fix the entire truck. You know one way to get past racism? Stop talking about color. Stop talking about white people and black people, white Americans and black Americans, European Americans and African Americans. Black scholar Shelby Steele says, it seems to me that in many ways it's about power. In order to pursue power, you have to have victims. And that excitement is created on the left. He goes on and he says that we want society to give us more because racism is so systemic. And he says, well, that's a corruption. And I know it's a corruption because the truth of the matter is blacks have never been less oppressed than they are today. That is African-American scholar Shelby Steele saying that. Folks, 7 lies Americans are believing. And wrapping this up, again, Newt Gingrich says, if we want America to survive as a constitutional republic under the rule of law, which protects the right of free speech and is dedicated to the belief that each one of us is endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then we have no choice but to fight to defeat the anti-Americans and to reassert our nation. Reagan would understand. Lincoln would understand. Freedom itself is at stake. Folks, don't be deceived. Pray, love your neighbor, speak up, because liberty is at stake. Check out my blog, www.wilsonrhett.com. Also my website, www.rhettwilson.org. This is Rhett Wilson for Faith, Family, and Freedom. God bless you.